Well, I'll firstly just like to thank my hosts and their sponsors and supporters for having me here today. The TCDC and of course the Ministry of Culture's Office of Contemporary Art and Culture, the Australian Embassy of course, and Art4D, thank you also, and of course the general organisation of the Bangkok Design Festival. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, or actually over a few days. I feel privileged and excited to be here. Thailand is one of my favourite countries in the world. I first came here in 1969 as a small boy, travelling with my family, and it left a great impression on me when I went to the Bangkok Reptile Park, and a 5-metre boa constrictor was laid out in front of me, and I got to hold the head of this snake, and I love snakes, so I think this was fantastic. So I've always been, I've always had a very close association with Thailand ever since then. Now, I want to talk about a lot of all the different aspects of my work. I'm going to start by giving a general overview of my commissioned architectural work. Most of my work is directly with architects, documenting their finished projects. So I'm going to start by introducing myself through what I do most of the time. Okay, this is my day job, all right? And I'll treat you as if you're architects. I'll find out if you are or not in a little bit. And then I'd like to talk about some recent Australian projects. I've just got a little series of different projects which I think will highlight the variety and the design qualities of a few of my prominent clients. So we'll go into a bit more detail with those projects. And then I'd like to show some what I call special commissions. These are projects that went over 1, 2 or several years, and I followed one particular architectural project. So I've got a few examples of that as well. And then I'd like to move on to my exhibiting projects. These are non-commissioned projects which I have basically decided for myself what I'm going to do. So they're much more from an art perspective, and the concepts and the intent. There are certainly crossovers, but there are also other ideas that I put forward through that. And then I'll conclude with my latest project, which we'll get into. But firstly, I need to know who I'm talking to. So, can I have a show of hands, all those who are photographers here? All right, there's a few of you. And what about architects? A few more, that's good. And other designers, interior designers, graphic designers, product designers, all right, and then just students of design, architecture, sorry, architecture, and then the rest. Who are the rest? Some of you didn't put your hands up. There's only one. Can't believe it. Okay, well that's good. All right, so there's a nice cross-section of people. Well, I'll try and give a balanced talk. I don't want to try and keep it too dry, too formal. It's easier for me if it's not like that, because otherwise I'll just read these notes, which I said I wasn't going to bring direct. But I've got some notes anyway, but I don't really want to follow notes. I want to just go with the flow, and I'm perfectly happy. I know there's a question and answer session at the end, but I'm very happy for you to interrupt me. So if you want to, if you've got something specific you want to ask about one of these images or what I have to say, please put your hand up and say what you have to say. Okay? Don't be shy. All right? I don't want to be standing up here on my own. All right? Okay. All right. We'll get into it then. All right. Now, I'm just going to just travel through these pictures. I might refer to them, I might not, but I'll have to give you a little background summary of who I am and where I've come from. You know my name, you've seen the t-shirt with my name over it, I think it's fantastic. I must get a photograph of that too for my kids, by the way. They don't believe that they've got a father who's an internationally recognised photographer, so I'll prove it to them. Now, I'm Australian. I was born in Sydney, I was raised in Sydney, I trained in graphic design, and then I worked in the advertising industry for a number of years. And then some way along, I moved into photography, and that was mid-20s, and then of course in Sydney doing anything. You know, when you start out, you do anything. I took on all sorts of jobs, and I covered a broad cross-section of different industries and genres, but I was always interested in architecture, and I naturally gravitated towards it. And then I moved to London in the early 90s, and I was still very much just establishing myself. I was a nobody at that point. But when I got to London, I could see the standard of work. It was a much bigger, more demanding marketplace, and I had to concentrate on what I did best, and that was to photograph architecture. So for about the last 20 years, I've considered myself a photographer of architecture and related subjects. Now, for 10 years I stayed in London, and I made a name for myself, and then with a young family I moved back to Sydney about 10 years ago. And since then I've maintained contact with my clients in London, and I travel back on a regular basis whenever I can to do projects in the UK and in other parts of the world too, from time to time. Now, we're obviously talking principally though about Australian architecture, and there's a few Australian projects coming up here, and I cover a broad cross-section of architecture. It can be large commercial projects, it can be public buildings, it can be certainly residential. I do a lot of residential photography, cafes, restaurants, interiors. You know, I've done little tiny things, literally, you know, a little bathroom renovation, right up to massive, you know, public buildings. Schools, all sorts. These are all in Australia. This is the work of Bates Smart, one of my main clients. Clive O'Neill, and a few of the bigger named Australian architects are working in the Far East. And certainly I know some have been working in Thailand. I also have a lot of involvement with artists. My wife is an artist, and we have many artist friends, and I document their work, and they're always poor, so I have to do it for nothing. But that's all right, because I like the work. This is one such artist, Warren Langley. And this is Zana's Associates. So, you know, large-scale commercial buildings and interior fit-outs, as I said, Sydney Airport. And one of the things that I think is interesting is, obviously from a technical photographic perspective, is the digital revolution. And prior to digital photography, obviously I made all my pictures on film. I used a large format camera, and everything had to be made in the camera at that time. There was no post-production facility. Well, there was, but it was very expensive, and I wasn't going to pay for that, and if the client was, that's fine. But generally speaking, everything had to be done in front of the camera at that point in time. So that meant controlling the situation as much as possible. And from a technical point of view, it was about dealing with mixed lighting and rearranging things and moving people into place, etc., etc. And nowadays, it's a very different kettle of fish. When I'm making a picture, and this is a good example, this one, I'm thinking about what I'll be doing in post-production, in Photoshop. What information do I need to get the final picture? Now this picture was made up of first of all, 2 pictures. I'm using a large format camera. I'm shifting the camera to one side so that I'm getting one side of the space. Yeah, and then I shift it and I make another picture, and then I stitch them together in Photoshop. I'm sure you've all, well, not all of you, but I'm sure some of you have done it, and you're probably aware of it anyway. Yeah. All these people, though, I picked up along the way. Some of them were people who were just passing through, who I had no control over, and other people I have positioned and I have directed. So these people up here, for example, and I think this person through here. So there was probably another, 5 or 6 pictures. And so with that, I put together what should look like a fairly natural, routine scene in this atrium space of the building. Now, that's a very different way of working than making it all happen in front of the camera at one point in time. I think we're very lucky now if we're photographers, and if you're starting out in photography and you're training, you've got it easy, okay? Because once upon a time I used to carry along not only a large format camera and a big tripod, but I had to bring my own lights because I have to light the space in order to fill in shadow areas, because the film didn't have the gamut to take the information in the highlights and in the shadows in one go, which of course we can do now in digital. We just make an exposure for the highlights and an exposure for the shadows, and then we blend them together. Well, we have to balance things out, and that might mean, and also the colour balance. All these different light sources have different colour temperatures. So in a scene like this, the daylight streaming in from the window, that's one light source, and then there are these halogen spots coming down at the top, up here and here, and then there was another atrium space here which had fluorescent lighting in it. All those different light sources on film all give a colour bias. And with film, you have to put a filter over the lens. You have to, in some instances, literally put a gel in front of the fluorescent light or the tungsten light, or even on the odd occasion, I used to gel windows to balance with the interior lighting. So all this took a long, long time. And nowadays, it's much, much easier, much quicker. And I don't know how I did some of the work that I used to do. I mean, it just took, the clients couldn't believe how long it used to take. 1 hour per shot. Not so much this one, this was pretty easy. Now, a picture like this, we call it, some people call it a night shot, but it's actually it's done at dusk, and it's about just being in the right position at the right time. So before the sun goes down, you find your position, and in this instance, I was very fortunate. I had a thoughtful client who knew what we were going to be doing, and they brought a number of people down from their office, and I sent them into the building, onto all the floors, into all the rooms, and they turned on every light. Yeah? We had control of the building. It wasn't quite open. So in this instance, we were fortunate. And a lot of this is about, my job is about timing. It's about, there's a small window of opportunity for me as the photographer, me as the documenter of these finished projects, between when the client, the architect, finishes the project and they formally hand it over to their client, after which time, that's it. You know, sometimes they can't go back. But certainly they don't have the same control as when the building is not occupied, it's not formally in the hands of the client, and who in turn want to get tenants in there or whoever, you know, is going to be using the building. So this one worked out incredibly well. Very often, normally, it doesn't happen quite so simply. But just getting back to the timing wise, if you make a picture at night, a scene like this, I've got to expose, obviously, you're pressing the wrong button, Greg. I've got to expose for these lights all through the building. And then I have to time it so that the night sky is not too dark. I've just got to get that balance. And depending on the time of the year and where I am, where you are in the world, that could be 10 minutes, it might be 20 minutes of optimum time, okay? And you've just got to be there, you've got to be ready and be prepared for unforeseen circumstances, like someone turning the lights out or a vehicle parking in the way or all sorts of things. There's normally some problem. Now, residential architecture, I'm doing a lot of that. In Australia, we're very lucky, we have a lot of space and people can build whole buildings. It's wonderful. Unlike in Europe, where the majority of the work I do in Europe is photographing interior refurbishments, which is fine, it's interesting, it's just the way it is, but it was rare for me to photograph whole buildings in the UK. But Australia has wonderful locations, and architects are making good use of those locations. And of course it's my job, part of my job, to point point out the location of the building. I have to tell a story with these projects, because in most instances the architects are left only with the photographs. They don't have to build it. They can't show the building itself. Usually they can't, to other people, to other prospective clients. So they rely on the photographs to tell a story, to explain aspects of it. For example, there are glass walls that can be moved away, and you can open the whole space up to the outdoors. So I have to demonstrate that. I have to capture that. I have usually a very short period of time in which to ideally capture every aspect of the building. Some architects expect it. Some architects, they want me to just stay there for days and days, ideally, but they don't pay me to do that, so I have to work hard. And it's also one of the things I always tell myself, every picture I make, I ask myself, what is this picture about? And usually there is one aspect, one dominant aspect that I want to capture. Now, a picture like this, or perhaps this next one, they're fairly clear. They should be fairly clear to a viewer. So I've got to make sure every picture I make, and normally I'm making a series of photographs, every picture has to be able to stand on its own. It has to ring true as a picture within a two-dimensional frame. And then at the same time, it has to work with other pictures so that together they form a narrative, a story of this building. Does that make sense? Anyone else? Anyone else going to be vocal and say yes or no?
Yes.
Maybe? Now, getting back to creating one picture, saying one thing, one of the things that I'm forever doing is manipulating my subject. So, for example, this picture, I could see this picture, but it wasn't quite right. So I had to move a number of things, and I just had to move them, not a lot, but enough to make sure it was perfect. Because the architect has designed these spaces to be perfect. And I'm talking about being in alignment, being straight and just so, balanced, visually balanced. And if anything is out, I see it. I see it whether the building is out, or whether the furniture is out, or if the people are out. And part of my job is to jump in there and manipulate the scene. And so I'll do that. But I'm not trying to cheat the viewer. I'm just trying to make it as clear as possible what I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's very good. Thank you. Learning. So I will adjust things. They might not be much, but certainly, for example, this flower vase there, I put that there because it needed it. Well, I think it needed it. But it's all about balancing the elements within the frame and telling that little story. Again, the dusk shot, it's a classic one, and I'm always, not always, but almost asked for this by clients. We want a night shot, like you did for so-and-so, or whatever. And that's fine, but I try hard to be prudent with it. I see it used an awful lot by other photographers and other architects, and I think you have to be careful that it's not overused. I think it's fine. It usually always makes a very striking picture, but you don't want to just see, the dusk shot, one after the other, because I find it rather boring. Now, certainly context is very important, and I will always try and place the building in its context, in its environment, so that people can understand how it relates to the environment, its scale, etc., etc. Now, all this should have been addressed by the architect, and if they're a good architect, it goes without saying that the architects are considering their location, they're considering the local vernacular architecture, and very often they'll make reference to it. You architecture students, is this something that you're taught? Yes?
Yes.
You awake back there? Now, some of you might recognise who this architect is. Tadao Ando. He's pretty famous. And it's actually an institution set up by the Benetton company. Benetton, the maker of jumpers. Well, they've sold so many jumpers around the world that they've been able to hire Tadao Ando to design this place called Fabrica, which is it's a design institution. And lucky students from around the world, if they get selected, they get to stay there for a year, and they can do photography or graphic design or filmmaking or all sorts of wonderful things under great tutelage, and apparently they just give them, they make sure they get given a bicycle because they're eating pasta. They're eating so much pasta that they're getting fat, so they decided to give them a bike so they can ride around to and fro. Anyway, great place. And a great piece of architecture too. And Carlos Garber, Rion Vega Cemetery, and then to conclude this little section, the wonderful Guggenheim Museum, which is a fantastic building. I can thoroughly recommend a trip to Bilbao. Now, I want to just touch on probably my most important client, who's a British architect named John Pawson, who is known for his minimalist designs. And I've been working with John for about 20 years, and he was, when I first arrived in London, and I didn't know who he was, but someone suggested, go and see John Pawson, he's fantastic, he's doing some really good stuff, and I didn't know who he was. And I went and visited him, and he had a little basement office, and he had another Australian architect working for him. There was only about 2 or 3 people working there, and John was very nice, and he said, well, maybe you'd like to photograph my house, it's just finished. And I said, sure, I'd like to. He rummaged in his pocket, and he pulled out a key, and he said, here you go, that's the key. Don't lose it though, because it's the key to all the locks in the house and in this office. So try not to lose it. And he gave me the address, and off I went, and I let myself into his house and had a good look around and was making pictures, and then the door opened, and there was a woman standing there, and she dropped her shopping and she said, who are you? I explained, embarrassingly, that I was so-and-so, and John gave me the key. John gave me the key, and she said, I'm John's wife. He's always letting bloody photographers in here. And with that, I was introduced to John Pawson. So I have other stories about John, but I might tell them a bit more privately. Anyway, John is a truly great designer, and he taught me a lot of things. His work is so clean and minimal and simple that I had to learn very quickly to work very hard at making sure my pictures told the story. And with that, I gained a reputation in London, and I've had that ever since. I've had people will know me through the work I've done for Pawson. I probably should have told a lot of stories. I'm standing in silence. This last one's a little bit closer to where we are, in Hong Kong. Okay, so that concludes my introduction, introducing myself to a prospective architect client, showing some of my general commissioned architectural work. Is it all right? I mean, do I get the job?
Yeah.
Good, okay. All right, we'll move on. I'd now like to just introduce you to a few Australian projects. And I think they're mainly in Sydney, but there's a variety. And this is the work of JBW, Johnson, Hilton Walker, who are a very well-regarded firm, mainly based in Sydney. I think they've got offices overseas as well. And this is the Hilton Hotel. And this one, actually, this is about 5 years ago. It predated me making pictures